among the masters. Teachers and pupils return to where it all began for a final confrontation. The show contains spoilers for The Acolyte, Season 1, and the novel Ahsoka by E.K. Johnston. Hi, I'm Peter.
And I called it. I freaking called it.
You did, Devin. This is Am No Acolyte.
Yes, it is. Today we'll be discussing episode 8, which is just titled The Acolyte.
Also, our timer plan for this season didn't have a lot of staying power.
Did not pan out. Turns out we failed a lot, and that's okay.
We learned it's hard to do things quickly.
Yeah. Mostly we learned that we really just can't shut up about Star Wars, no matter how much we try.
That's a big part, yeah. We really like hearing ourselves talk about Star Wars, yeah.
And apparently our 3 listeners really like hearing us talk about Star Wars too, so you're welcome, 3 listeners.
You're welcome. Yeah, we love you guys.
So last week we were talking about having some finale anxiety. So after seeing the finale, I want to talk, was our finale anxiety eased? How do we feel about what we were talking about last week?
I don't know. I felt kind of satisfied, but I also was like, I didn't get a full circle thing. I didn't get a closed loop, and I thought that would be better for this story. Here's what it is. My takeaway from this episode was they really wanted a season 2.
I'm okay with that because I really want a season 2.
Yeah, I just didn't want it to affect the episode, which kind of affects like the period the season ends on. So like my anxiety to answer the question was not really eased. I was like, okay, like I'm not giving it 5 stars. I don't know what I'm giving it because it was still cool, but I'm not giving it 5 stars for that reason. Okay. Yeah.
My finale anxiety was eased. I felt like this, for me, hit all the right marks. For the most part, or at least most of the right marks. I feel like, again, for me, it did a really good job of balancing, like what we were talking about last week was like, we were like, this is going to be tricky because they need to close up enough to make it feel like a satisfying, like, close to this season and wrap up some of these things and not end on a cliffhanger and not leave like too much, but also to leave some stuff open for season 2, like leave enough unanswered that it makes you really want a season 2. And for me, I thought that it struck that balance really, really well. I feel like the main arc of, the investigation, the murders, the mystery, like that was all kind of resolved more or less. There was some things that weren't necessarily super satisfying, but it definitely set up a lot for next season for sure. And I felt like that balance was struck really well.
Yeah. Hearing it that way, like, they did wrap up the origin story of the Acolyte 100%.
Yeah, I feel like that's what this season really was. I feel like
I take back what I just said though, because it's 90%. Because they kind of cut us off at the knees with that whole "you're the same person," but
yeah,
we're not gonna figure any of that out.
It remains to be seen how many seasons this show will end up having. But this, with where we left off now, it feels like this whole season was a prologue to whatever's gonna come next. I mean, I guess everything is a prologue to whatever comes after it, but like by definition. But you know what I mean?
Yeah. A cool thing though that we got in this episode at the beginning was David Harewood's character. That was Senator Rayancourt.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
He said a number of things when he was talking to Vanessa that kind of like brought home all the themes.
Yes, I was like, hang on, I wrote down like
good,
his speech
I don't remember
I was
it
like,
at
I'm
all.
gonna want to reference it.
It's not always good to have things spelled out. I think I like it when things are left open to interpretation, but that's definitely not Star Wars' style. And I'm glad that it was actually put in a way that was like eloquent.
It was very clear. So what he said was, the Jedi are a massive system of unchecked power posing as a religion, a delusional cult that claims to control the uncontrollable. And Vanessa says, we don't control the Force. And he says, not the Force, your emotions. And I was just like, this is it. This is the whole thing. Like that just really summed it up so well.
I think I can't put this into words, but what I like about that is it does spell it out very
Mhm.
well for anyone who's watching it and is a kid and needs to kind of be like, okay, this is what it's trying to teach us. But he also, it doesn't say what he's really hinting at, which is that, duh, this doesn't work. Your brilliant
Mhm.
idea of making wizards and creating this system of goodness
Mhm.
by being all, oh, we'll always be objective and not have
Mhm.
attachments and pick people when they're so young that we can make them emotionless.
Mhm.
It's like, yeah, that doesn't work. You can't just manufacture good guys. They
Yeah.
automatically become bad
Right.
by accident, even
Mhm.
trying to be good, which
Mhm.
is exemplified so well by Soul,
Right.
because
Exactly.
they're still human. They're still, or not even human. It's Star Wars and many different species, but
Yeah, and that's, like, what he goes on to say. I didn't write this part down, but he went on to say, like, what happens when, not if, when one of you snaps, like, what, like, we're all fucked then, basically. And,
yeah,
like, that proves to be true, and, like, that's gonna be,
yeah,
like, we're gonna see that with Chimera, basically, like, any Jedi that turns to the dark side. Obviously, Anakin is the prime example, but there's lots of other examples of Jedi that turn to the dark side and do a lot of damage. So you're like, oh, finally somebody said it. You know what I mean? It's
it's
like,
a good way of putting it too. It's essentially trying to manufacture goodness, and I think
yeah.
that's why when everything Keimer said in his episode with his
Hmm.
reveal, I was like, I'm so down with this guy
Hmm.
because even though he's quote unquote dark side, he's just an anti-hero at the end of the day. He's just like, okay, the good guys are actually bad guys, and I don't like that.
Yeah.
And it's like
Yeah.
he's not wrong. He's just not. He's a dick, but he's
Hmm.
not wrong. It's
Yeah,
like,
and like I like how you put it, like manufacturing good guys is like when you are raising them like you're the good guys, you're the ultimate force for good in the galaxy, they come to believe that anything that they do is the best and right thing. And that's Soul's main problem is like he's able to tell
mhm,
himself and convince himself that everything that he does is the right thing to do. Like even up until the end, he's like, I did the right thing. And it's like, no, you freaking didn't. But like he thinks because
yeah.
this is what I did and it has to be the right thing because it's what I did. It's like this is very circular logic. It's like, well, it's that logic of like I'm a good guy and therefore I did what I did was good because I'm a good guy.
We'll
That's
get
who I
into
am.
Soul later, but I
Yeah.
really liked that about him so
Mhm.
much. I think it's almost more pointed out with Venestra, who he's talking to in the scene,
Mhm.
because she's done the whole like PR thing in the
Mhm.
past and make decisions just so like your butts are covered and stuff.
Mhm.
And I'm like, that's not always the right thing. That's bureaucracy talking.
Mhm.
And it's like, well, anything so that our side wins because our side
Mhm.
is good and therefore, and
Right.
it's like, but that logic doesn't mean you're doing good things.
Yeah, it's very
It's,
like the ends justify the means kind of thing. It's like,
yeah,
well, ultimately we should be in power because we're the good guys. So like whatever we have to do for us to keep that power is ultimately going to be
yeah,
right. It's like, no, not really. And it's like we see here, like now here is where we learn that he's trying to, make this proposal to do an independent investigation of the Jedi and their power and everything. And that's why she's been keeping this whole investigation a secret. This is the reason behind why she did, all these optics that she's talking about is because she knows that this guy has that
yeah.
motive, right? So this is who she's been trying to like hide all these things from because she's like, I don't want the Jedi to look sketchy because there's this guy being like, hey, does anybody else notice how sketchy the Jedi are?
Yeah. He's like the only one in this time, apparently.
Yeah, and she's like, don't let him see all the murders.
Okay. Yeah, there is a moment where he literally gets her to like admit something
Hmm.
and he's like, murders? There's been more than one?
Yeah.
And she like makes a face like,
Oh
oh,
shit.
I told him more than I should
Hmm.
have.
Hmm.
And in that moment, when I was watching it, I was like, yo, Vanestra is legitimately bad at her job. Like, like, like I know like she's your homegirl from the books and everything, but I was like, if you're like at that level in your organization and you're taking a meeting, that's such a big oopsie. Even if
Yeah.
like you are trying to get away with shit, she's not very good at getting away with shit. And she does
No.
it again later in the episode with May, where May's like, wait, I had a sister, and her face just doesn't move for a couple seconds, like, oh my god, did I just do it again? And I burst out laughing. I was laughing so hard. I was like, apparently her character flaw is she doesn't know when to shut up, and it's so funny to me.
Well, I don't think she had any reason to think that she wouldn't remember her sister. Like, she didn't remember anything else, but she remembered up to the fire.
I don't know.
I read that moment as like, I think that she had thought that her memory had been erased back to the fire. And then
Uh-huh.
in that moment, when she realized that she didn't remember she had a sister, she realized that her sister had been erased from her memory, which is different.
Mm.
So I think she was kind of having
Okay.
that realization.
That makes sense. I think you're right. That's part of the build on that mystery, like the little details. It
Yeah.
makes sense. It makes sense.
Um, you know, it's been interesting watching this series coming from reading the books where, and I've talked about
Mm-hmm.
in previous episodes, like how different she is from her character in the books when she's 100 years younger, versus where she is now. But yeah, this whole season I've been trying to kind of figure out like where she's at, what kind of like what her whole deal is. And so now in this episode, I'm like, oh, so she like sucks. Like
Yeah.
it's been, you know, I'm like, oh, is she just kind of like, she's kind of given up or she's just become really bureaucratic or like she's, you know, whatever it is that she's kind of like just not as good. And I'm like, oh no, she straight up sucks. Like she's just going to
Yeah.
throw Soul right on under the bus, pin everything on him. Like, dude, that's cold.
Very. Um, I wanted to ask you about this because I noticed throughout the episode
Yeah.
we talked about how in the past she was like really straightforward, kind of wooden, and
Mm-hmm.
suddenly we were getting a very different performance from her in this episode. And it could
Mm-hmm.
be because things were unraveling for her a little bit. But she was, for someone who's several hundred years old and a Jedi Master, we know that like there is some stuff at stake now. We know an explanation for it because of the
Mm-hmm.
ending of this, but her emotions were like extremely on display. She was on the fritz.
Mm-hmm.
Like I could tell when she was
Yeah.
pissed. I could tell when she was
Mm-hmm.
like desperate. It was
Mm,
like
yeah.
I was like, "You call yourself a Jedi?" Like,
She was not keeping it together.
yeah, she's like one of their head honchos, and she's extremely emotional. So when that guy called out her emotions, I was just like, he said it. There, I was doing the Leo meme. I was pointing
Hmm.
at the screen. I was like, that's
Yeah,
what's up.
yeah.
But you had a theory that Kimar might have been her apprentice, and we had that confirmed.
Hmm.
Do you want to tell us what you thought about that?
I thought I freaking called it.
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, and I think that that is probably the root of like 90% of that of what you're describing with how emotional she's getting. I
Mm-hmm.
think is probably mostly rooted in the emotions that she's having around that. So we learned that she had thought that he was dead. So she's just learned that he is alive. So they land on Brendock. She senses him because he's taken off the cortosis helmet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and I think that's where things kind of really change for her. And she already was coming into it with, you know, I got to cover this up in some way because I can't let the senator guy find out
Yeah.
um, about all this sketchy stuff going on. But I think that the revelation that her old Padawan is alive and is involved in this kind of sends her spiraling.
Do you think she figured that out or suspected it a little bit before? Or she didn't figure it out until she sensed him when she found Soul's body?
That's what I was trying to figure out. I I don't think she suspected it because she seemed really surprised when
Yeah.
she landed and she sensed him.
Yeah.
I also think we would have seen. I think if she had suspected it earlier on, if she had suspected that he was the one that trained May or anything like that, we would have seen more of that emotional, like afraid side of her earlier
Mm-hmm.
on if she was struggling with that turmoil.
It's an interesting setup for the next season, especially now that they revealed it seems to be implied that his master was Plagueis
It's
from that
very
quick
heavily implied
cameo.
for
Very
that.
heavily
Yeah.
implied. If Plagueis isn't just spying on him, and even if Plagueis
Hmm.
is spying on him, it could be because he's just like, oh, there's my boy trying to overthrow me, breaking rule of two.
I was just like connecting some dots in my mind. Maybe this was obvious to other people, but um, I was thinking about how Darth Biceps said that he was really old,
Yeah, I'm glad you remembered
and
that.
we were talking about how that would
Yeah.
make sense with Vernestra because she was really old and she could have been his master a long time ago. And with Darth Plagueis being in the mix, because then I was like, but how would he have lived so long and still be so hot? Um,
Plagueis is the one who learned how to prolong life.
exactly. That was like his whole thing.
Yeah. So he must have faked his death, and it's like
Hmm.
Plagueis kept him alive
Yeah,
and looking sexy as fuck.
exactly.
It's
It's
not
like,
like, oh, I stayed old in the Force and ended up looking like Palpatine, which is what you'd expect from the dark
right,
side.
yeah. No, Plagueis is like, how would you like to stay young and hot forever?
It's kind of funny because I like thinking Palpatine like knew Plagueis could do this stuff, and he would just say to Anakin, "Oh, dude, if you use the dark side, it's like AI. You can do anything." Like he's like a bad businessman. He's like Trump. He's like, "You can use the Force to prolong your life." I don't know why that got so Italian.
I
That
was
was
just gonna
nothing like
say,
him.
what is this?
I think I think I just don't want to talk like him. I just don't want to do
You
it. I
know
don't want
what?
to go anywhere
Follow
near
that
that.
instinct.
So so I'll stick with the Jersey gangster. So you can use the Force. You can use it to prolong life. My master, he was really good at this. He used to do this all the time. Are you good at it though? Can you do it? Uh, yeah, yeah, I know how to do it. I can totally do it. Do a really kind of a botched bad mechanic job. You know, use some duct tape and lightning bolts. You might have some. You might come out with some wrinkles. You might
but
make it
it'll
to like
but it'll do the job.
he just like knew it can be done. Do you know how? No, no, I
No,
don't really know.
it's totally possible.
Yeah, I saw him keep Jason from the Good Place looking super hot for years, just hundreds of years.
I mean, you should have seen this guy. Biceps for days. I like that
Biceps for
that just
days.
goes into him just like
Yeah,
going on and on about how hot he was. And Anakin's like, "Dude, focus. We're talking about me."
yeah. It is cool that it lines up that Kimar
Mhm.
is Venestra's apprentice because
Mhm.
she has a purple blade, suggesting she's willing to kind of,
Mhm.
go both ways, even in a time where the Jedi are kind of delusional. And the fact that she was like, no, I really think even though it goes against your ways, I can have a lightsaber whip. It's just smart. It's fine.
Mhm. It's
His
cool.
whole thing seems to vibe with that. Even just the
Mhm.
detail of like he'll have a surprise second small blade saber and he
Yeah.
hides it. He won't show you what he's got up front. He'll just use it
Mhm.
as a no, I'll just
Mhm.
kill you. I don't care.
Yeah.
Um
And then surprise, light dagger.
yeah, all of his I don't care, I'll just do it choices really do align with her. He's just
That's
like
true.
I'm not on your side anymore. Literally that's
Mhm.
almost his only difference. Um
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like he got disillusioned with the Jedi and was like, I'm just gonna go do me.
mhm.
Um, and depending on what this falling out was that he had with Venestra that left him literally scarred, you know. I don't know. I'm super intrigued to find out more about that.
I wonder if, because you have to ask yourself, and yes, they haven't told us, what could he possibly want? And he said power, freedom to use my power however
Freedom.
I want. And
Hmm.
it's like, dude, you could just go really far away. There is an outer rim, which means there's an
Yeah.
outer rim. You
Wild
could just
space.
go to your own planet where the Jedi can't find you and just do whatever. And it's just like clearly he wants more. And it's like
Hmm.
maybe this dude actually thinks because his life has been prolonged by Plagueis, he could live forever. Maybe Plagueis discovered immortality, and he's like, well, fuck. At that point, screw
Hmm.
it. I would
Hmm.
like to just be able to actually take over the galaxy and enjoy myself forever. Because what's the point of immortality if you're a hermit?
Right. So another thing I was thinking of is bringing this back to the Chiari Mundi discussion that we had earlier
Oh
about
yeah,
how Chiari Mundi is like,
a
well,
lying liar face.
right. People were all up in arms about, well, in Phantom Menace, he says that the Sith have been dead for a millennium, and now he is there when they are hearing about it and stuff. And so here I'm like, okay, so one of the options that we posited at that point was like nobody lives to tell this tale. It gets covered up somehow, and he goes on believing that there was no Sith, which looks like what is happening. So that kind of ties up that thread and makes it make sense. It did leave me wondering, like, what was the I'm like, why did they bother putting Mundi in this? And I was like, did they really just put him in there knowing that people would bitch about that line just so that they could bring it back around and be like, "Ha, fuck you," which I think is kind of funny.
I feel like if they did, they would have told us by now. Because they would be proud of that.
Right. I'm going to move on to a segment I'm calling Dope Shit, where I just list a bunch of stuff that I thought was dope.
Mm-hmm.
The visuals in the asteroid belt scene, or like the planetary rings, when May is flying through there and Soul is chasing her, I thought that the visuals in that scene just looked really, really cool. And the way they also made Soul's ship look really menacing in that scene it
Mm-hmm.
was just a really cool visual shift. How he's got this like much bigger ship. It's kind of like lumbering after her. It kind of made me feel like there's a name for it and I can't remember it, but there's a name for like the sensation. It's like a certain type of phobia of like large things in water or like really big things. You know, when there's just like a huge whale and like a small thing or something, it's like just has this feeling of like it's so massive, it's
Yeah.
scary and like I don't
It's
know
kind
if
of
it.
Nemo-esque
Yeah,
in a
kind of.
way.
Yeah, so like having her in this small ship, him in this much larger ship, but just being right on her tail and this much larger, it looks like his ship is kind of about to swallow her up. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought it was just a cool way of setting that up visually, this kind of like metaphorical turn of him being more like villainous in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
But I just thought that scene looked really, really cool. Um,
Yeah.
the ending shot of Osha and Darth Biceps standing looking out over the sea from behind and like the music there just like
The
I just
music
thought
was
it was
really
so
cool.
cool. The music was
The shot
cool.
was cool. The handhold, even though, like, I agree, they're totally gonna bang, the handhold was a little awkward.
Yeah, the handhold thing, I was like, all right, okay, we're like setting up some stuff, and then it goes to that other shot from behind them of the two, and like the music hits right there, and there's like the waves crashing and
Mm,
stuff. It was just like really, really cool. I kind of almost wish that they had put the scene with Vernestra and Yoda at the very end before that and just ended on that shot of the two of them looking over the sea.
that would have been a better shot to. Because then when they cut to the other one, I was like, oh, it's not over yet?
Yeah,
Like, that
exactly.
was
Like
my
that
brain.
that just felt a lot more final. And so I see what they're
Yeah.
kind of trying to do, like feel it final and then have the Yoda reveal as a little like tacked almost like an end credits post credit thing, but not
Yeah.
post credit. And so I can appreciate that sentiment, but I think it would have worked better to end on that really dramatic music note and everything. I would have done that. Um,
Yeah. Also, it would have been better because supposedly the show's called The Acolyte, the episode's
mhm,
called The Acolyte.
mhm,
Now we've discovered this was Osha's journey to becoming
mhm,
Kymir's acolyte and
right.
learning the truth of her past so
Mhm,
that she was also like, okay, yeah, fuck the Jedi. Like,
yeah.
everybody's basically just learning the Jedi are like the evil empire in
Mhm,
this. So you're
mhm.
kind of pro Team Sith. So it would have made a lot more sense to end on that. I agree.
Yeah, I agree. Um, the other thing that the absolute dopest thing in this episode that had me and a lot of other fans just losing our absolute minds,
Mm-hmm.
showing the Kyber crystal bleed was such a cool choice. That was
Very cool.
so dope. It looked awesome. It was exciting to see that. I was just like, yes, yes to all of that.
I was amazed they got to do it, like when it happened. Um, yeah, because I feel like usually stuff like that that's from like the legends and the literature and the comics that like a lot of fans like know that's how red lightsabers are made. Like usually we don't get to see it; it just stays in that world. So I was like, good
Mhm.
on them for advocating for it. We want to see a red lightsaber get made in this episode.
Yeah, it was so cool. And I love like so you see the crystal turn red and then when she ignites it, it like starts blue and like turns red, which I don't think is really how it would work because once the crystal is red, I don't think it would have like leftover blue in it. but it looked really cool. So I was like,
For all of my complaints about the show, that made it worth it for me. And
mm-hmm.
then I thought to myself, hold on a minute. Why didn't Anakin's lightsaber bleed after maybe the 100th youngling he killed? Like, where's the line?
You know why it didn't happen then? Because George Lucas didn't think of it, and Leslie Headland did.
Technically, Leslie Headland took it from
No. I mean, putting it on screen. Putting it on
putting it
screen.
on screen. Yes. That's fair. That's a
But
good point.
also, at
Yeah,
the time of Revenge of the Sith coming out, that was not in lore yet.
it wasn't.
So
No.
that the lightsaber bleed thing, for listeners, if you're not familiar with this, the lore is that the reason that Sith lightsabers are red is because dark side users, basically, they call it bleeding the crystal, and it's kind of bending it with the Force in order to imbue power with it that makes it like bend to the dark side. Basically, I'm doing a bad job of explaining it, but that's basically the gist. um, this was not always the case. There's been different varying lore around red Sith lightsabers, but where this was introduced, the idea of the bleeding the crystals was introduced, was in the novel Ahsoka by E.K. Johnston, which came out in 2016. It's awesome. And what's really cool about that is that that's the book where, a minor spoiler for the Ahsoka book, but it's explained that the reason that Ahsoka's lightsabers are white when she comes back in Rebels is because she killed an Inquisitor and then purified his red crystals, which is so fucking rad.
That's right, which makes her so dope.
Like so cool.
She's so freaking awesome.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
I believe is the Inquisitor that we see in Tales of the Jedi when she decides
It's
to come back.
it's
Right? Or
a
no?
it's a different one.
Different one?
That episode of Tales of the Jedi is basically a super condensed version of what happens in the Ahsoka book. It's a different
Got it.
story. It's a different
Yeah.
Inquisitor. It's a different story. But it's
Okay.
basically, because that's a whole long book, and this is like a 15-minute episode. But it's basically the gist. It's basically covers the ground between Clone Wars and
Yeah.
Rebels and what she's up to, and it ends with her meeting up with Bail Organa and kind of starting to become how she kind of starts to get involved with the early iteration of what becomes the Rebel Alliance.
I see how it's super condensed in Tales of the Jedi.
Yeah.
I think that's why I like Tales of the Jedi so much.
Oh yeah, Tales of the Jedi is great
because it had those little beats for
mm-hmm.
her are big beats,
mm-hmm.
and it does handle them well. I think.
Yeah.
They're so short, but I've rewatched them a couple times already because it's so
they're
enjoyable.
great. Did you watch Tales of the Empire? Tales of the Empire was really good too.
I did. That one disappointed me a little bit. I just thought it was building to like a more unique character beat for what's her name? Barriss. Yeah. I really thought we were going to get because the trailer led me to believe this. I thought we were going to get Barriss gets trained by Vader.
Oh.
So then I was thinking, oh my god, what this is all going to build to is there's always been a rivalry, a fucking anime deep rivalry between Ahsoka and Barriss, and Ahsoka was Anakin's apprentice, and Barriss was Vader's apprentice, and they're gonna have a showdown probably maybe in Ahsoka season 3 or something like that. And I was thinking the fact that it was Filoni doing all of it, I was like, oh, that'll be so. It's predictable, but it's so good. It's such good drama, especially because they used to be good friends, and I'm like, if there's going to be a redemption arc, it should happen reluctantly through that and be earned.
Yeah, that's a cool idea.
Yeah.
It reminded me of another book called Inquisitor: Rise of the Red Blade, which is also really, really good. That one just came out in the last year, I think. That one is about an Inquisitor and following kind of like, it's like the making of an Inquisitor, basically, how they were a Jedi. Order 66 happens. They kind of took the Jedi that they felt like they could make into Inquisitors, and kind of what that process was like, and through this like really arduous, like basically torture that, and like brainwashing and like reconditioning and stuff that they go through to like make them Inquisitors. So the Tales of the Empire, like Barriss's journey of being made an Inquisitor was reminiscent of that. We're so far off topic.
It's still Star Wars, and that's all interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Still Star Wars. But we should talk about Soul. We haven't talked about Soul and the twins, and we got to cover that before we get done with this. his downfall. This was something I really liked about the episode.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll talk about it for a second because I've mostly been kind of poking at little holes in the plot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I thought you'll appreciate this because we came up with this trope for guys when we were in college and we were watching TV shows. We were like, this person thinks they're in the right. They think they're doing all the right things, and they're actually being a dick. We called that the Peter Parker syndrome,
Oh yeah.
which is very misleading because Spider-Man represents actually a lot of good traits. So when I say that, it was like calling it a Disney princess syndrome, where you grow up thinking you're supposed to kind of live this path. So like Disney princess syndrome, it's like girls think, oh, my life is supposed to be like a Disney princess, and it's like that's a thing people make fun of. And I'm like, I think the guy version of that is you think I'm supposed to be the hero. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
but I did an extravagant thing for you on Valentine's Day, so you should accept me and love me no matter what, even if
Mm-hmm.
I don't have my shit together. It's like that's Peter Parker syndrome, and I'm like, I think Soul falls into this category.
Mm-hmm.
But like the fact that he kept saying I did the right thing,
Yeah.
like I think it was very good writing
Mm-hmm.
that Soul ends up being kind of the villain of this
Yeah.
show more than even Plagueis, more than
Mm-hmm.
even Venestra in this story. You kind of find out a cool reveal about her, but like this story,
Mm-hmm.
Soul is the villain because he caused
Yeah.
all of this trauma, and he to the end
Mm-hmm.
never realizes
Mm-hmm.
he still thinks he's in the right. I thought that was
Mm-hmm.
good. That was
Exactly. I
smart.
agree, and that's what I think his biggest fault in all of this is that he absolutely fails to acknowledge or to get what he did wrong right up until the end. And I think
Yeah.
that's it's such an interesting choice to make that his fatal flaw, because that's such a relatable thing. Like we all know people like that who just
Yeah.
are incapable of acknowledging any wrongdoing, and that's like kind
Mm-hmm.
of one of the most frustrating kinds of people to
Mm-hmm.
deal with, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I think especially in the past few years we've all like I think we have more of a cultural awareness of that, and like the importance of being able to take accountability for your actions. um
But it hasn't changed those people in our
no,
culture.
those people still don't do it. I think
Yeah.
that we have more of an
We can put our
awareness.
finger on it.
Yeah, exactly. We have more of an awareness and ability to recognize it.
Yeah.
Right. Right. But the people
But
who won't do it still won't do it.
yeah.
So I think it is such an interesting choice. And I really liked the choice to like really point that out here and make that like his fatal flaw. And it is so, like, we talked about this last week, but like it makes for a really nuanced villain. Like I rewatched it with Chris last night, and he was asking me today, like, so can you explain, like, is Soul a bad guy? Is Soul a good guy? Like, and I was like, that's the question, right? Because I'm like, I think he really did think that he was doing the right thing, but he was also going to great lengths to justify it to himself.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's
he
also the results of your actions. I think a lot of things need to be accounted for.
Exactly. I'm like,
Yeah.
I think he was a very good guy in a lot of ways, but he made some really bad decisions. And then he failed to acknowledge his wrongdoing and just dug in deeper and convinced himself that everything that he does is the right thing to do because he's a good guy. And he says at the end there that his biggest regret was not being able to save them, but like he's still so adamant that like I did the right thing, and he's still really upset that he's like, no, my biggest regret was that I couldn't save both of you. Like he's still
Mm.
on that, like, no, I couldn't, I feel so bad I couldn't save you both, like that's my
Even
biggest
though
regret
he
and all this.
literally let one die on purpose.
Yeah, I was like, your biggest regret isn't killing their mother? Like that was a pretty big fuck
Yeah.
up.
Devastating their society.
Yeah,
Like,
also like if he hadn't killed her, probably both of the twins would have survived, because like Anasea would have been able to help save them, or like not causing, they wouldn't have been in that position in the
also,
first place. Like
even if he'd half measured his good intentions that led him down a dark path, even if he
mhm.
half measured it, it's like Anastasia said to him with her dying breath, I was gonna let her go with you.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
he could have at any point he could have like stopped being a dick you know, and it was like, oh, you were just a little bit of a dick and you
Mhm.
forced some outcome of this event. But like the
Mhm.
more he did it, the more pain happened around
Mhm.
him. And I think that's where, for me, he's a bad guy
Mhm.
because you're a tragic character. If it's like a play like a Shakespearean play where it's like the character has a tragic flaw that
Mhm.
makes a bunch of bad things happen
Mhm.
that can hurt other people, and you're watching from the outside and you're like, everybody else must really hate this monster, but we're seeing it from their perspective, and it's a tragedy because usually at the end it's like, because of your tragic flaw you also must pay the price, you're doomed to die, but we empathize with you as a character because you see the error of your ways at the end. So
Mhm.
then it's just, how tragic. You were
Mhm.
good all along because you just made mistakes, so everyone else learn from these mistakes.
Mhm.
And I'm like, with Soul, he didn't. So
No.
he's just a villain, like to the end. He's
Mhm.
not a tragic character. He's just an asshole character, and we're still supposed to learn from his example
Mhm.
so that we don't make
Right.
those same mistakes.
Mhm.
And it's like, do you notice how at the end the distinction is, can you empathize with the character? And the answer is kind of, in that you can see how they got there
Right.
and you can learn from that. But
Mhm.
you also are like, I can't empathize with the character because they had a chance to kind of express regret and attempt to atone and make things
Mhm.
better, even a smidgen, because that's always
Mhm.
all that's allowed in terms of runtime.
Mhm.
But
Right.
yeah, he didn't even do that. We didn't even get that what's it, that mulligan
Mhm.
from him. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's my verdict on Soul. He just sucks.
Yeah. I will say again, and I will say it as many times as people want to hear it. Lee Jung Jae just absolutely knocked this role out of the park.
100%.
He was absolutely amazing. Could not have asked for a better performance out of anybody. Like, I'm just
You,
blown away.
you know it's the season 2 we should get, but we won't? Now that Soul has died a bastard and Jason exists in this universe, he should go to the bad place and have to do the trolley car problem with Jason the whole time. And he'll be like, but if I move the trolley, I might hit Osha. And it's just like, that's not your problem, dude. That's not for you to decide, man. It's be so much fun. I want that whole show. I want him just bewildered, be like, of course I'm in the good place. I'm a Jedi. And it's just like, no.
Janet shows up like, fun fact, even though he turned to the good side at the end, Anakin Skywalker is in the bad place because of all the children genocide.
So funny. Okay. I have one more thing that's worth saying about Soul,
Okay.
because this bothered me so much while I was watching the show. His rematch against Jason slash Darth Biceps. Why in the hell was he winning? Why? Like, especially with everything we know now, like that Jason's probably several hundred years old.
Hmm. I
Like,
agree.
Soul didn't learn any lessons in that time period that
Hmm.
would make him, oh, now I am more mature and I will win the fight. That was
Hmm.
not earned. That was
No.
not there at all. They just wanted to tee up, like, Osha being the one that takes him out, but I was like, tee it up some other way. He would not have been winning that fight. He would have been
Yeah,
getting his ass whooped that whole time.
I
It bothered me a
agree.
lot.
And I will say that I was a little bit underwhelmed by that fight scene. I don't think it was nearly as it was a pretty good fight scene, but it
It
wasn't
was
nearly as
fine.
good as any of the other fight scenes that we've seen in this
No,
series.
episode 5 was so much
It was
more
so
good than
much
that.
better.
Yeah.
It was so much better.
Yeah.
And a lot of the
Yeah.
fights that we've seen in other episodes have been better. So I
Yeah.
was a little underwhelmed by it. And I also, this is a little bit of a nitpick, but I feel like they kind of overused the slow motion in
Yep.
this episode. I feel like there were some moments of it in other episodes that were awesome, like in the
Mm-hmm.
fight with Kalnaka, possessed Kalnaka, when he like jumps over the thing and goes into slow motion.
Oh,
Like that
yeah.
was so cool. There's been a couple of really
When
cool
Soul
moments
jumped
of it.
backwards off that bridge, like,
Yeah,
I had to go back and watch it again.
yeah.
It looked kind of like like unfinished CGI to me a
I
little bit.
agree. It looked weird and kind of like
It looked weird.
unnecessary. I was like, that wasn't a
Yeah.
cool enough move to really warrant that. And I did
Definitely
it a
not.
couple,
No.
yeah, I was just like, yeah. There were a couple of other moments in this one that was just like they it, like slowed it down for a second. And I was like, it wasn't really a cool or dramatic enough thing to really warrant that. Felt like it was
Yeah.
a little overused, but
Yeah, the fact that they had Soul winning that fight bothered me so much because I was
Hmm.
like, look, the last time this guy killed all of his friends, and remember how at the beginning of that fight,
Hmm.
suddenly Soul comes to like save Osha at the last second, and then it's just a
Hmm.
one-on-one with him and Darth Biceps.
Hmm.
And we were thinking, but where was he before? Are we going to find out later? Nope, we're not going to
Hmm.
find out later.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
he just left.
He's like, I'm taking my 5, guys.
So worth mentioning, he had not gone anywhere to do anything important. He didn't even look injured, like he'd been like violently knocked away or anything like that.
Yeah, that
Um,
that all could have been solved if we just had a shot of him like waking up from being knocked out.
yeah, they were closely matched in that first fight, but
Hmm.
I definitely felt like Darth Biceps would have easily killed him if he put in the elbow grease.
Yeah.
Was the impression I was getting, and I was just thinking throughout this fight, this should be freaking Spaceballs right here. He should be saying, "Evil will always win because good is dumb." Have you seen that movie?
Yeah. I haven't seen it in a long
Yeah.
time, but yeah.
I recently rewatched it and I'm like shocked that it held up. But it was when he says, "Oh my god, you fell for it! You actually fell for it!" And he like is like pretends to shake his hand. He takes his like force
Mhm.
ring,
Yeah,
and then he says that, and I was just like, "That's literally Darth Biceps throughout all of Episode 5."
it
It's
really
like, "Oh, surprise!
is.
I have another lightsaber." It's
Right,
not
right.
like, "Oh, you
I
think
think
I fall? I'll break your neck." Like that's all he did. It was just like,
yeah.
"You idiot!" But, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like a better approach for this episode for that would have been to have Darth Biceps hand Soul his absolute ass, and then at the end, before like he gets him to where he can kill him, kind of steps aside, which is a very like Sith master kind of thing to do, to step
It
aside
is.
for your Padawan
Yeah.
to come in because you want the Padawan to kill them because then they turn to the dark side, right? So like that would
Yeah.
have been a good way for him to set that up because he was like, oh no, like Osha's gonna come for you, like she gonna be pissed, or May, like really either or in this scenario. But like
Let's
he
talk about
knows
them
that,
now.
yeah.
Like, yeah, because I super duper agree with that. And I thought, yeah, they wanted to tee it up so Osha had her emotional moment.
Hmm.
But I was like, it could have just happened like he handed it to them. I didn't like how
Yeah.
he's like, we'll see who gets to him first. And I'm like, why do you want to get to
Hmm.
him? Why are you so intense? Well, I guess he wants to make sure he dies so he doesn't tell anybody about him. But he could have
Yeah.
Osha or May do it. And that's
Yeah.
more
Well,
in line with what you're
he
suggesting.
also wants to make sure that Osha hears him confess to killing her mother.
Did he? I feel like that's what May
Yeah.
wanted.
I
Like,
think I
May
think
wanted that.
that's true. May wanted that, but I also think that Darth Biceps wanted that because that was going to be the thing that would kind of like finally push her over to the edge to the dark side.
Yeah. But I imagine he was probably going to like beat him in a fight and make him tell Osha
Mm,
the truth. And instead
yeah.
he just lost. And I was
Hmm.
like, that's not good.
That's not as good. Yeah, and I liked how they had May, like he was like, "Oh, May, cool, you can like kill him now." And she was like, "No, I want him to like face the High Council, confess his crimes, pay for them, like do that whole thing."
This bothered me.
Okay.
I didn't understand why there was this big. I understood why May suddenly was like. We talked about how she was a bit of a narcissist in the past,
Mhm.
but she still does care about her sister in her own way.
Mhm.
It would seem like if her motivation has shifted to anything, it's unbrainwashing her sister.
Mhm.
But there was such a shift in her character to be like, no, 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 I want to bring him to
Mhm.
justice and everything. I'm like, I don't think you care about that.
Mhm.
And then she was like, anything for Osha at the end. I will have my memory wiped. And almost all of May's decisions, although they seem to serve Osha's story, which Osha's story I think was great in this
Mhm.
episode, a lot of May's overall decisions didn't make sense for
You
her.
know, I gotta agree with that. I'm having a little bit of trouble following the lines and like the arcs of these two characters. So
Hmm.
we have a little bit more information in this episode about, okay, so they're the same person. They're
Hmm.
not twins, they're not sisters. They're
Which had been hinted
the
at
same person in two
before.
bodies, right? I one thing that I didn't notice until my second watch through is in the beginning when Osha has the vision of May killing Soul. That was a vision of herself killing Soul, but she
Hmm. Can't
literally
make the distinction.
yeah, she even herself. So like earlier on when we were like, how come Soul can't tell them apart in the forest or like all these things? It's like Osha herself literally can't tell herself from May.
But he still let May die because he heard them calling each other by their names.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to like reason through this and be like, okay, so they're the same person split into two somehow. So in some episodes I was like, is May is like the dark side of this person and Osha is the light side of this person. Like there's
That
a
was a thought.
yin and
Yeah.
yang kind of thing. In this episode, we literally have them switched like clothes so that May is in white and Osha is in black. They have in their battle.
Mm-hmm.
We have a very like yin and yang kind of thing going on. Is it like a two sides of the same coin kind of situation? Is it like a they're the same and this is just but they're in different situations and this is how that person would act or respond in either of these different situations that they're in. But then it's like, well, but when they were raised, they were so different as kids. So it's like, where did that come from? That made Osha want to go off and join the Jedi and May to stay behind and burn things. Um,
This was my theory. I think I messaged you after the last episode, or maybe after we recorded, is once they started talking about symbionts and they're the same person, I
mm-hmm,
was like, May must be dark and Osha is light, which
mm-hmm,
explains like May's I'll hurt animals kind of
mm-hmm,
behavior and more dark tendencies as her primary instincts, and Osha being kind of just like ambivalent and innocent
mm-hmm,
about a lot of things. And I
mm-hmm,
assumed the Coven must have known this because they made them. And my theory was that the Ascension
mm-hmm,
ceremony, where how will you lead the Coven?
mm-hmm,
I don't know. The answer to that was that they were going to merge them back into one
mm-hmm.
person. And then that person would have all of the memories.
Right.
But what's interesting is that person now, if they were to remerge, would have the memories of being raised by the Jedi and
Mm.
being raised by the Sith. But
That would be
she'll
so
have
interesting.
realized that the Jedi had fallen. So
Right.
she'd choose Sith and
Right.
become the acolyte, and then they would execute Soul, which they did.
Mm-hmm,
We predicted that someone would kill
mm-hmm,
Soul without a
mm-hmm.
weapon, which they. Oh, I loved
Yeah.
that.
Oh yeah,
We
yeah,
didn't even
yeah.
talk about that at all. The fact
Yeah.
that this was like right, this was like hiding a magic trick in plain sight. This was like
Yeah.
Prestige. I was
Yeah.
like, of course, killing them without a weapon means force choking. We're
Yeah.
idiots. Like we were like thematically, it means executing them, not like
Mm-hmm,
oh whether or not you have a weapon or not when you kill the
mm-hmm,
Jedi. It's like oh
mm-hmm.
no, it meant can you kill them by choking them to death.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
like okay, cool. Um, yeah.
So when they did the ascension thing and May had the marking on her left side of her head, and I was like, well, maybe Osha's would have been on the right side of her head, and then when they merge,
Mm-hmm.
it's in the middle. Like Anasea has the big spiral in the middle of her forehead. So yeah, that could have had legs.
Like a lot of stuff added up for that, and it
Yeah,
still might be a thing, but
yeah,
like I think this is why when we asked what was my verdict on the episode, I
hmm,
was like I would have liked to see
you
whatever
wanted
that
something
is.
like that. Yeah,
Well, I wanted some completion to that story.
yeah,
I don't want that to happen in season 2. I want them to like
hmm,
address it in season 1, and then it's like season 2 could be there's a whole nother story
hmm,
with these characters that's icing on the cake, but I
hmm,
wanted that loop closed.
hmm,
And instead they're just like memory
hmm,
wipe. I get that like the
yeah,
memory wipe was necessary so he'd let her live, but I'm like, you could just take both of them back with you right now and then figure it
yeah,
out later.
right,
Like it didn't make
yeah.
sense for it to be an ultimatum at
It
that moment
also,
because I'm like, they're both working for him.
yeah, and that moment kind of didn't feel quite right to me because it seemed odd that Osha and May, having finally found their way back to each other after all of these years, and they're like
Mm-hmm.
holding each other and they're like crying together and they're finally like, oh my gosh, we're back. Like they missed each other so much. They're so happy to have each other
Yeah.
back in their lives. And then they're like, let's immediately separate. Like it feels like they would be
Yeah.
like, we're never gonna let each other go again. And so to immediately be like, well, we'll just totally go our separate ways. And they have this little like, oh, I'll find my way back to you, like kind of thing. But
And
it
also, I love you and I want you to live, but I'll erase you as a person.
yeah, it felt very I don't know. It felt very like this is what needs to happen for the plot, and it felt kind of unmotivated on the
Yeah.
characters. And this was the part of it that kind of made the least sense to me, or that I vibed the least with. The rest of it I really liked, but this how we left things with May and Osha just felt weird, and like I didn't really understand it, like it wasn't really vibing with the motivations that these characters had. And so like Osha's like, well, what do we do now? And May is like, well, what do you want to do? And she's like, I don't know, what do you want to do? So May's like, well, what do you want? And Osha's like, well, I'll go train with him, which didn't really seem like she wanted to do that until she
No.
killed Soul and then was like, I guess I'm dark side now. So I'm like, what was she did, it didn't really seem like that was what she wanted, but I guess she's trying to like do a replacement, like, well, take me instead of my sister because he wanted to kill the sister. And May like doesn't even skip a beat. She's like, are you sure?
Yeah.
But she's not like, oh no, May, like don't do that. She's just like, you sure? You cool? All right, fine.
That felt extremely out of character for May,
I
especially.
agree. I agree.
May was like, all I am selfless and I'll do whatever for my sister to heal
Yeah.
in this one. And I was like,
Yeah,
that.
and then like didn't even bat an eye.
Yeah.
Made no attempt to talk her out of that. And I get like she's trying to be supportive because like, she when she wanted to be a Jedi, she was like tried to kill her. So she's like,
It's a
well,
big
I don't want
swallow.
to. It is. And then she's like, well,
Yeah.
I don't want to lose you again. And she's like, you're not. You're doing what you're meant to do. And I'm like, when did we decide that what she was meant to do was go train with Darth Biceps and become a Sith? Like that doesn't seem like something that was
Yeah.
discussed or something that Osha had been saying that she wanted. You know what I mean? Like she kind of
No.
explicitly had been saying that she didn't want to do that. And then now all of a sudden it's like, this is what you're meant to do. It's like, is it? Are we sure about that? Like,
I I'll play devil's advocate for this one just because on one hand these were twins who were raised being taught how to use like the force by witches who clearly like were willing to use kind of both dark and light sides of it.
mm-hmm,
And at one point Osha was like, I think it would be really cool to like go with the Jedi and stuff. And
mm-hmm,
even though she was kind of influenced into saying that, her she probably had an inclination for an innocent sense of exploration
mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
the Force. And May was better at it than her,
Mm-hmm,
but it wasn't like that wasn't something she was raised with and like cared
mm-hmm,
about. So
mm-hmm,
now it's like, okay, well, guess what? We found out the Jedi do suck and our whole family is dead. So,
mm-hmm.
but you could get this really sick abroad program with Darth Biceps. Go to fucking Taiwan, Italy, wherever we decided this location was shot, Spain, and
Portugal?
Portugal.
I think so.
Yeah, you could do a really sick abroad Sith Jedi program, which is the closest thing we have to what we were originally doing um, with this guy who, I already vetted him for you. So they rejected
Mm-hmm.
me from the program. But,
Right.
you still might be able to do it. Yeah, and I feel like that's kind of like what they were
But
going
like
for. And I was
I
just
can
like, that
vouch for,
doesn't really work.
his
It
biceps,
doesn't.
very good. 10 out of 10, do recommend.
It's like that's the conversation they were having. That's basically what was at stake. And it's well, I mean, what was at stake was he was going to kill May, I guess. But I'm just
I guess
like,
that
I'm
was the
watching
scene.
this. I'm watching this, and I'm just like, I'm not so sure he's going to. And then he's just like, well, I found you. I'm still going to kill you.
He didn't really seem like he was going to, yeah.
He seemed like he was kind of
That's all
gonna
like
be
I
super
forgot.
chill.
Yeah, like until
Yeah.
Osha went to make this deal with him that was like, well, let my sister go and I'll come and train with you. I had forgotten that he like wanted to kill May because he like didn't really seem like he did. It took me a second to like remember that. So I was like, well, why don't the two of you just like go off together and go live your best sister life and like do whatever you
Yeah.
want? And then I was like, oh right, because he was trying to kill May, but like it it didn't really see, he shows up, he's like, if I can find you the Jedi can too, like kind of from a like, you girls better be careful, where do we go from here? He's kind of like being a buddy,
I feel like they literally could have probably said to him, we know you don't want us to live unless one of us is your apprentice.
Right.
But like, can we discuss options?
Yeah.
Like
Right.
what you'll accept? Can you hide us in a prison forever somewhere or
Yeah,
something?
there was like no negotiation at all.
Nothing
Like,
at all. Which you usually can't negotiate with a Sith, but I was like, he seemed like he was like waiting for them to slip a piece of paper across the table.
kinda.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. And they just jump straight to they're terrible negotiators because
They're
he was like,
horrible
yeah, like
negotiators.
at this point he could have just totally forgotten that he wanted to kill May. Like it did not seem to
Yeah.
be very high on his list of priorities.
I'm so glad you're not going to kill May, which you probably forgot about, but do you want to suck all the information out of her brain? Well, sure. Thanks for offering. That works too. And they're like, oh, God, I'm so glad we thought of this. I'm like, think harder.
Yeah, exactly. Like he seems like he's kind of like forgotten all about trying to kill May, and then Osha is like, "Take me instead," and he's like, "Okay, I wasn't even
And we have
gonna,
Disney
but all
Princess
right."
Syndrome.
Yeah,
We
no,
right
exactly,
there. We have Peter
exactly,
Parker Syndrome and Disney Princess Syndrome in the same episode. She's
exactly.
Belle. I
Yeah,
will tame this beast and his Darth biceps.
you know what? Get it, girl. Get those Darth
Mm-hmm.
biceps. Um, I want to circle back and say a couple more things about Plagueis, which was a really exciting tease in here
Yeah.
for those who recognize him. For anybody who didn't recognize the creepy guy with the Nosferatu fingers in the cave, that's Darth Plagueis. He is most famous for being the master to Palpatine, and he's never been seen on screen before. So this was a really exciting reveal, and I think that this was just an absolutely brilliant drop to just put him in there like this. It's a great tease for season two.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this more than anything else has gotten a lot more people excited for season two, and a lot of people who may not have been really excited for it.
Honestly, more than Yoda. I'm more excited for Plagueis than
Oh,
Yoda because
I
that's
think everybody is, and I think a lot of
yeah.
people who had been kind of like lukewarm on it, all of a sudden are like, "Oh my god, Plagueis!" Like a lot of the detractors are people who just hate anything that's Disney Star Wars, but
Mm-hmm.
really love a lot of the like expanded universe stuff. A lot of people,
Yeah.
um, and Plagueis technically is canon because he's mentioned in Revenge of the Sith, but he's more so an EU character. There's a whole book, Darth Plagueis, that's by James Luceno. That's also really really good. But a lot of people are very very excited about this, and so I feel like this was just a great like. I feel like Leslie Headland just like dropped Plagueis on the plate. Like, here you go. Here, have some Darth Plagueis, you ungrateful bastards. Like,
Yeah. This will be such an interesting character to delve into. So
yeah.
I don't think I'll watch season two episodically.
Oh,
Like,
interesting.
unless it looks like it's going to be amazing. I want to binge season two. Like, I really want to binge season two.
The main reason I don't want to do that is because of spoilers. Because
True.
the internet has no chill, and I really like being surprised by stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm either gonna have to go on like total media blackout for 8 weeks, or
Honestly, like, even if I see something, as long as it's not from, like, a finale, which I'll just
Mhm,
plan to, like, watch it right after the finale. Like,
yeah,
I'm I'm like, it's fine if something from episode 3 or 6 gets
yeah.
spoiled for me. Like, that's not the end of the world if I'm gonna watch it all in one day, anyways.
But I mean, like, but you never know, especially with this show when you have an episode like episode 5 where they killed off some major characters. Like,
Yeah,
I wouldn't have wanted to have those spoiled. Like those were
true.
big plot points. So like,
It's a good point. It's tricky these days to like get away with
yeah,
doing that. It's
yeah,
really tricky. But I think I do want to have that experience with a show like this because I think it changes
yeah,
your perspective. It's
mhm,
also like how we were saying, like in hindsight, I really think this should have been a movie. Like I think it would have been a
yeah,
better cut as a movie, and you could have let moments breathe and like focus on things
mhm,
that made sense for the
mhm,
twins.
mhm.
Because a lot of the right elements were there, but then it was like, let's make it longer where we don't need to. Let's add suspense. Like I don't think the right cut is there for this, but the story is amazing. To be fair,
Yeah, I think this story would make a really good trilogy. Like if this was the first movie in a trilogy,
yeah,
and then the second movie is like all about Plagueis and like whatever we're gonna see with him. We get some Vernestra stuff, like wherever this is going, and then like some third act to tie that up. Like probably would be a really good structure for a trilogy. So yeah,
yeah.
excited for Plagueis. And then we get a first look at Yoda at the very end there, which makes sense. It would have been weird to not acknowledge him. We know that he's around during this
He's
time.
alive. Yeah.
Um, I appreciate. I'm pretty sure they were using a puppet for him, which I
Hmm.
appreciate. I know they do a lot of like puppet work in these shows, and it was kind of nice to see like Yoda hashtag make Yoda a puppet again.
Yeah, that's funny. It's a good campaign behind it. Yeah.
Yeah. I have one quick thing because I had a request for
Mhm.
more Chris observations, so I want to bring
Oh,
you
good, good.
my Chris observation from when I watched it with him yesterday. The part where they're on Brendock and May takes Osha down to the tunnel that she discovered to tunnel their way out to escape from the fortress. There, Chris goes, for the first time ever, they explained how someone survived a fall.
Yep. Yeah,
Um, let's do our silly question.
definitely. Who would you put on the ballot in Star Wars from this episode? Timely, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we were talking about this earlier. We were like, I bet we have the same answer. I'm
Yep.
sure we have the same answer.
I'm so confident. Should we just say it at the same time?
Yeah.
One, two, three.
Senator
Senator Ray
Ray
and
and
Court.
Court. It's gotta
Yep.
be. Yep.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
no one else. Yeah.
No,
That's the guy.
he's
He's the AOC of this episode.
yeah, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
He pretty much is. Yeah.
This is what it is.
He's
I'm
like,
calling
hey,
out on it.
there's too much power centralized over here. We nobody is checking this insanely powerful group of people that have just taken all this power and
Yeah.
authority for themselves. It's completely unchecked, and they seem to be just doing whatever they want. And
Yeah.
we should maybe be monitoring that. Like, we should
Yeah.
maybe look into this.
It's also worth noting he's two things that would describe him. One, he's a politician. Two, he's just some guy. He's just a guy.
Yeah.
And he outmatured Jedi Grandmasters and schooled them. Like,
Yeah.
someone who's hundreds of years older than him and should be so much more mature than him and is like, we are monks and you're a politician. And he's just like, I'm so much smarter than you. It's crazy. Like,
he's Ron Swanson in the hardware store, like, I know more than you.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's
our guy.
Rain Court 2024. This is roughly what, like 132? Yeah, Rain Court 132 BBY.
Good actor. I bet they'll have him back in season 2. Like,
oh yeah,
easily.
definitely.
Yeah.
This is definitely a setup for more storyline.
Yeah, and he'll definitely get murdered.
Yeah,
calling that, he'll get murdered. It'll be a good story. Well, that's our show. Thanks for listening.
We are planning to do a full season recap episode at some point where we'll discuss our thoughts on the season as a whole, as well as our predictions for season 2. So we'll be posting that whenever we get it done, at whenever it's ready. May the Force be with you.